All right. I've now read chapters 28 through 36 of A Game of Thrones. And I'm recording this right before bed. I finally got all my thoughts, at least most of my thoughts, written down for y'all. So I'm recording this before bed. Uh, and something I wondered back in my very first video after chapters 1 through 9 is now becoming much clearer. I asked then in that first video, can honor survive the throne? And after this section, I'm starting to think the answer might be no. After chapters 28 through 36. Because what we see in these chapters is that the throne seems to destroy the very virtues that helped men win it in the first place. C.S. Lewis once said that we create men without chests. That is, people who lack the moral core that makes honor possible. And then we wonder why virtue disappears. This is almost exactly what we see in this section in the characters of Robert, the King Robert, Viserys, and the Lannisters. They're essentially men without chests, as Lewis describes. Robert tells Ned something in this section, though, that really struck me. He said, I swear to you, I was never so alive as when I was winning this throne, or so dead as now that I've won it. That's just an incredible line. And that line actually reminded me of something from The Lord of the Rings. Because when we first meet Theoden, the king of Rohan, he's not the heroic king we expect. Or the heroic king that those of us who have read Lord of the Rings over and over, the heroic king that we know and love so much, when we first meet him, he's not that heroic king. He's tired, withdrawn, almost lifeless. He sits on his throne while others manipulate events around him. It takes Gandalf to finally confront him and say, too long have you sat in the shadows. But here's the difference. Theoden had been bewitched and manipulated by the words of Grima Wormtongue and the influence of Saruman, who Wormtongue was acting under the orders of. Robert Baratheon hasn't, though. It's the result of the throne itself. Power, comfort, resentment, politics, and years of ruling have slowly drained the life out of Robert. So instead of a king being restored like Theoden, Martin shows us something darker. A king who won the throne as a hero, but is slowly dying inside once he actually holds it. And this is where C.S. Lewis's insight about moral decline becomes really powerful. Because C.S. Lewis once said in the Screwtape Letters, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope. Robert didn't become dishonorable overnight. He drifted, and the throne seems to accelerate that drift. Which brings me back to my core question reading this book. Can honor survive the throne? Ned Stark still believes it can, but Robert is starting to look like proof that maybe it can't. Instead of the return of the king, like in Tolkien, Martin seems to give us something closer to the exhaustion of the king. Robert was heroic when he was fighting for the throne, but the moment he actually became king, something died inside him. He also reveals that Lyanna was the only woman he ever truly loved, and that his marriage to Cersei was purely political. And that suddenly reframes everything about this family. Because Joffrey then isn't just cruel, he grew up in a household without love, without a real father who cared about him, without a uh, without a father who loved his mother, um, without any model of real honor of what a father and a husband should be. Again, it doesn't excuse his behavior toward Arya and the butcher's boy that he had killed, but it explains why he thinks only in terms of power and status. But then this is also where C.S. Lewis becomes interesting again, because Lewis wrote about medieval chivalry in several places, most notably the Discarded Image, as well as studies in medieval and Renaissance literature. And Lewis argued that medieval honor wasn't just about bravery. It's about a moral code binding power to responsibility. A knight could not simply win power, he had to be worthy of it. Lewis once described chivalry as the attempt to combine, quote, the knight's ferocity with the Christian virtues of humility and mercy. In other words, power had to be restrained by honor. And the tragedy of King Robert is that the throne has separated those two things. He still has the power, but the honor that once guided him is fading. And Ned actually recognizes this. At one point, he thinks this was the boy he had grown up with. This was the Robert Baratheon he'd known and loved. And Ned believes that if he can prove the Lannisters were behind the attack on Bran and the murder of Jon Arryn, then the old Robert will return. He imagines Robert smashing the Lannisters just as he smashed Rhaegar on the Trident. But the question now becomes, is Robert still there? Or has the throne changed him too much? Another sort of humorous moment that made me laugh is when Tyrion is forced to fight alongside Catelyn's party after being captured. He's handed an axe. A dwarf is handed an axe, and when I saw it, I was like, all right, we're finally the dwarf has his axe. And then Tyrion says a line I was not expecting. He said, and I highlighted this in my Libby book, I have never fought with an axe. That made me laugh because I wasn't expecting it. It's funny because in Tolkien, and really in Norse mythology and Northern European literature generally, dwarves are practically defined by axes. They're miners, craftsmen, warriors who wield axes almost as extensions of themselves. But Martin flips this trope completely. His dwarves are not that kind of mythic warrior. They're social outsiders navigating a brutal political world. Tyrion isn't Gimli, although he does fight well with that axe. I just gotta say, I think there's something natural about a dwarf with an axe that makes him fight well, because he does fight really well to be fighting for the first time with an axe. But anyway, Tyrion's something much more complicated. Then Tyrion contradicts Littlefinger's story. Remember, Littlefinger had claimed Tyrion once won the dagger in a bet. But Tyrion tells Catelyn, whatever, and this is after the fight, after he's given the axe and all that, and it's the very end of that chapter. He says, whatever you may believe of me, Lady Stark, I promise you this. I never bet against my family. So this immediately raises a huge question. If Tyrion is telling the truth, which I think he is, like from the very beginning, I've liked Tyrion pretty well. But if Tyrion is telling the truth, then Littlefinger lied. And that actually fits Littlefinger's character, I think. Because Littlefinger seems to be a man that's only out for Littlefinger. Like, he only cares about himself. And that means that the entire situation with Tyrion's capture might be based on a deliberate deception. And that is incredibly dangerous. But the moment that really defines this section is Robert's decision about Daenerys. He wants her killed. Even though she's only 14. Even though she was pretty much a baby when everything, like the war was happening. And she's only 14. And even though she's pregnant, he wants assassins sent. And Ned calls him out on this. Ned says, you send hired knives to kill a 14-year-old girl and still quibble about honor? And then Ned repeats the same principle he told Bran at the beginning of the book. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Just a great line. That's medieval honor, just as C.S. Lewis described it. Lewis, in the Discarded Image, said the ideal knight was, quote, a man of blood and iron who is also a lover of courtesy, gentleness, and mercy. In other words, a knight had to be strong enough to wield power, but humble enough to restrain it. That feels exactly like Ned Stark. He's willing to use violence when necessary, but he insists that power must always be accountable to honor. If you judge someone worthy of death, you must face the moral weight of that judgment yourself. You must look them in the eye. You must hear their final words. And Ned even adds the implication he told Bran earlier. If you cannot bear to do that, perhaps they do not deserve to die. Robert doesn't understand that anymore. The throne has changed him. But then we jump across the sea and we see Dany's brother, Viserys, who is somehow even worse than what we're seeing in Robert. Viserys, he still calls himself king, even though he has no throne. And the Dothraki mock him mercilessly. They call him first the Sorefoot King, and then when he's tricked into sitting in the court, which is a place only for women and and the weak and all this, they call him then the Court King. And the reason this is funny is that Viserys doesn't even realize he's being insulted. He thinks he's still royalty, but he has none of the qualities of a king. And this again reinforces this theme. In this world, kingship does not produce honor. It often destroys it. And yet, right as the political world is becoming darker, the story returns to myth again with Daenerys. She holds the dragon eggs. She feels the baby move inside her. And the narration says it feels almost as if brother to brother, blood to blood. Then she whispers to the child, "You are the dragon, the true dragon." That's what Viserys has been calling himself. Viserys has been saying, "You don't want to wake the dragon." Talk about his wrath and all this. But Dany, as she's holding the dragon eggs and feeling the baby move inside her, she whispers to her child, "You are the dragon, the true dragon." And this reinforces something I've been thinking for a while. The political players, the Lannisters, Robert, the court of Westeros, or Westeros, are obsessed with the Game of Thrones. But the story keeps returning to dreams, prophecies, and myth. And that suggests something deeper might be happening beneath the politics. So here's the theory that's forming in my mind. The people playing the political game believe that power determines the future. But the story keeps hinting that something else might. Dreams, prophecies, ancient magic, maybe even something like providence. C.S. Lewis often wrote that in medieval storytelling, the visible events of history were only part of the story. Behind them were forces of destiny, virtue, and divine order. And I'm starting to wonder if something like that is at work here too. Because if the throne destroys honor, then maybe the future won't belong to the people sitting on it, sitting on the throne. So the big question now isn't just who will win the Game of Thrones. It might be, will the game itself be overturned? And if dragons really are returning, the people obsessed with politics may be the least prepared for what's coming. They may be the least prepared for the winter that's coming. But anyway, that's my thoughts. I'll see y'all next time in the next as I continue this journey. Um, I'll see y'all next time.